Hello and welcome everyone to this live event, Knowing the Subject, brought to you by the Teaching English team. Today we'll be looking at our focus for July, August and September, which is knowing the subject, the professional practice all about what it is to be an English language specialist. We have three webinars today. The first is kind of about reflecting on your pedagogical knowledge of knowing the subject and introducing what that means with Stephen and Zainab. We'll meet them in a moment. And then we'll have a webinar focusing on grammar called Activating Grammar for Communication. And our final third event today will be a teachers share session with three primary teachers talking about how they make grammar and vocabulary meaningful in the primary classroom. So, for everyone joining today, say hello in the chat, say hi in the comments, tell us where you are joining from. We'd love to know. All right, so I'm Melissa, your host, and I'm from the north of Spain in the Basque Country. And I can see teachers from Indonesia, from Vietnam, from Pakistan, from Azerbaijan. Wow, incredible. So let's get started. But first, a reminder, if you're watching in Zoom, you can write in the chat to interact. If you want to ask a question, you can put it in the Q&A area. If you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, you can use the comment section for questions and for answers and interactions. So we're just about to start our first session called Knowing the Subject, a practical introduction with our two Facebook courses for teachers, tutors, who you might recognize, Zainab and Stephen. Hi, Stephen. Hi, Zainab. How are you?
Great, thanks. Yeah.
Doing well. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah,
Great.
good mood.
I'll tell the audience a little bit about you, but if you're doing a course at the moment, an online course, and you're in the Facebook group, you might already know all this already. So Zainab Shivani is a teacher and teacher educator from Libya. She's got all experience all across the board with children, teenagers, adults over 20 years. She supports teachers for the British Council all across the MENA region, and she's one of our current tutors. Stephen is also a very experienced teacher, living and working in Portugal. He's a tutor in the Facebook group, and he's worked with students and teachers all across the world in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and online, of course. So let's get started. Stephen, when you're ready, you can share your slides. And I'll be back later. If you need me, you can just shout. All right, everyone, enjoy your time with Stephen and with Zainab.
Thanks, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's lovely to see so many people from many different countries. As Melissa mentioned, I'm Zainab, and I'm here today with my co-presenter, Stephen. And today we're going to explore everything we need to know about knowing the subject and what you need to know about knowing the subject as an English teacher. So let's get started by looking at what our session aims are for today. So the first thing we will be talking about is what is knowing the subject. We will also talk a little bit about what are the British Council's professional practice. And then we will talk about how we can develop our understanding of the subject more effectively. And finally, how can we continue to develop our subject knowledge? Now, if you can tell us in the chat box which aim or which session aim you would like us to focus on the most. Stephen, what about you? What do you think we should be focusing on the most today?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for me personally, it's actually about continuing to develop my subject knowledge, because I think sometimes when you're experienced, you kind of get in the habit of thinking you know everything, or you know the things that you know, and you know how to do things effectively, but there are always new ways to improve, I think.
Yes, definitely. And I can see a lot of people writing 3 and 4. So yes, I agree with you. I think we will be also focusing mainly on 3, how you can develop your understanding of the subject more effectively. Okay, so let's move on.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's begin with a quick warmer. We just want you to write A or D in the chat box. So I'm going to read a statement and just, you don't have to write the whole word, just A or D in the chat box is enough, just to see whether you agree or disagree. So if we look at the first statement, good teachers don't need to know everything about a subject. Do you agree or disagree? Looks like we have a mix.
A mix, actually, yeah. Quite a lot of disagrees, actually, though, I can see. So that's interesting.
Yeah. What do you think, Stephen?
Oh, no, I don't think they do. I think our learners bring lots of things to the lessons, and they can help us understand things just as much, or we can pull things out from them, and I think that's more important.
Exactly. I think it's impossible to know everything. You
Definitely,
can't know everything
definitely.
about the subject. There will always be something that you have to learn or you need to learn or, that you're developing in. Okay, so let's look at the second one. Knowing the subject is more important than teaching techniques.
What do you think about this one, Zainab?
Yeah. I think there isn't really anyone that's more important than the other. I think they kind of complete each other. I mean, if you have the teaching techniques, but you don't know your subject, how are you going to teach it? But if you know the subject and you don't have the teaching techniques, you're not going to get the message across. So I think you have to have both. So I don't know, partially agree, partially disagree, I guess.
We should have put the option of PD, maybe.
Yeah. But there are some, I can see some in the comments saying that they are both important, they are both equal. So yeah. Let's look at number 3. Teachers should continue learning throughout their careers.
And a lot of A's.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of A's there. I think that's true for. I would get bored if I wasn't continuing to learn throughout my career. So
Yeah, you don't want to be doing the exact same thing for 20, 30 years. So it's important that we're developing, it's important that we're learning, and things change as well. Time changes things. New methods, new approaches come out, technology changes things. So as a teacher, we need to stay up to date. So yes, I agree. And I can see everyone, a lot of the majority agree as well.
Yeah, there's a nice comment about throughout the journey of being a teacher, you learn. So that's a nice comment, definitely.
Yes. Okay, thank you, everyone. Let's move on.
Okay, so we're going to be looking now at what knowing the subject is, which is our theme at the moment and the focus of the session today. So I think the kind of key thing to remember about what knowing the subject is, it's one of the British Council's professional practices. And obviously, as we looked at just then in our kind of warmer activity, it focuses on knowing the subject, so knowing about grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, but also about the kind of methods and pedagogical practices that we need in order to help our learners develop. And it can also include things like digital literacy, subject-specific literacy, things like that. And there is a workbook that you can download that is related to that topic. So I'd definitely go there if I were you. You can find links to kind of develop your understanding of this. So another question for you all. If you're thinking about knowing the subject, like we all said, we can all continue to learn throughout our career. And we've got 5 things here that are part of knowing the subject. So awareness of language systems, knowledge of theories, knowledge of different methodological approaches, understanding of different literacies, ability to select different methodologies. So just in the chat, everyone, could you choose a number and write a number? Which one do you think is most challenging for you? So for example, for me, probably number 4 is the one that I would say I need to work on the most. So yeah, that's me. How about you, Zainab? Which one is the one that you think you need to work on?
I actually agree with a lot of the comments. A lot of them are saying 5.
Yeah, I
So
can
I
see
think,
that.
yeah, I think 5 I would probably find most challenging because there's so many aspects to it. You're thinking about the different methodology, the different techniques, and then, also depending on students' contexts and the learning objective of the lesson, there's a lot going on there. So yeah, I can see that the majority are saying 5, which I think probably would be the most, I mean, for myself, would be the most challenging.
Yeah, and I think the thing is sometimes the methodologies that have worked in the past might not work now. So you might need to kind of the ability to change and do that, I
Yeah.
think is definitely really important. Yeah. Okay, thanks everybody. Lots of yeah, comments on mainly around 4 and 5. Okay, so like I said, the knowing the subject is part of the British Council professional practices. And there are 11 of these, as you can see in this colourful pie chart. And obviously they focus on the different ways that we can continue to develop professionally. There are different ones and we focus on them. On teaching English, we focus on them at different points in the year. So for example, understanding my context or using multilingual practices or managing the lesson. There's lots of different things that we need to think about to continue to develop professionally. And right now, from July to September, the focus on teaching English is on knowing the subject, which is the area we just
Yeah.
looked at. Yeah. So what we're going to be looking at for the rest of the session is how we can develop our understanding of the subject more effectively. And Zainab and I are going to talk about 2 different things. We hope they're related, and we hope that they will help you kind of focus on your own professional development and maybe give you tips for where to go for that development. So, Zainab, what are we going to be looking at now?
So knowing the subject obviously is a very, very broad topic. So we have an hour, obviously, so we had to choose what we hope would benefit you in this hour. So we're going to talk a little bit about delivering a meaningful listening lesson, and then we'll also talk about how we can make pronunciation more engaging. So hopefully you'll get some practical ideas from some of the ideas that we share that you can also use in your classroom. Okay, so let's begin with delivering a meaningful listening lesson. Okay, so again, if you can share in the chat box, you can write M or F. We're just going to look at what these statements here, whether you think it's a fact or a myth. So if we look at the first one here, students should understand every word they hear. M, myth, or F, fact?
Got a lot of M's in the chat.
Yeah.
I can just see a big group of M's.
I think I've seen only one F so far.
Okay. Oh, no, yeah,
They're all number 2. Otherwise, they're all M. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Students definitely do not need to understand every single word.
Yeah.
We're going to speak more about how listening should be more about meaning and communication than really just understanding everything you hear. If we look at this next one, listening lessons are mainly about answering comprehension questions. So M for myth or F for fact?
There's a bit more of a mix there, and I can still see quite a lot of M's, but we're definitely getting more of a mix.
What do you think, Stephen? Do you think it's a myth or a fact?
I think it depends, because I think sometimes with syllabuses and what people have to teach in the classroom, they have to learn a lot of learners have to learn how to answer comprehension questions, maybe because it's part of the national curriculum and the national tests. So it is part of it, but it's only part of it, I think. I wouldn't say mainly. I would say it's part of it.
Yes. And finally, learners need a reason to listen. Nice to see more Fs, yeah?
Yes. Yeah, definitely lots of Fs are kind of flowing down in the chat, which is good. Yeah, I think this is definitely important. What do you think, Zainab? Do you always give your learners a reason?
Yeah, I mean, listening is active and there needs to be a purpose. So there really isn't any point if you ask them to listen to something and then after they listen, maybe create some kind of activity. They need to know why they are listening in order to find out what meaning they're going to get out of this listening. So yes, well done, everyone. Okay, so let's move on to talk about how listening is active. I think there is a big misconception about listening, and that learners need to understand every word. But obviously, listening is actually an active process, and good listeners are constantly thinking while they're listening. So when we say active listening, what exactly do we mean by that? Here you can see on the slide that we have a number of steps when we are doing listening with the students. And in order to make it active, you want to make sure that you first allow them to do some kind of prediction about what they're going to hear. This activates their prior knowledge. It gets them thinking about the topic, which makes it easier for them to understand it later. You also want them to notice important clues. So the point isn't for them to understand every single word, but just to really notice the important clues and get that meaning out of the listening. You then want to move on to make sure that they can connect the ideas together so that they can build meaning as well. And like I mentioned earlier, listening isn't about understanding every word, but you're also thinking. It's an active process. You want to make sure that they are asking themselves, does this make sense? Did I understand this? What does this mean? So they're thinking also while they are listening. And then finally, listening for meaning and not listening to every word. So this is kind of a misconception that we have, that students, if they don't understand everything, that means the listening was not successful, but that's not the case. We want to make sure that they just got the meaning out of it. It's okay if there are words in the listening that they did not understand. So from these steps here, Stephen, which do you think learners need the most support with?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it depends a lot. So I think sometimes with certain listening topics, they do need a lot more. There was a nice comment in the chat about kind of priming the learners before they listen. And I think that's really important, like with kind of setting a kind of context or something like that. I think that's super important. But I think a lot of the time, the difficulty can be about following what's happening, like the links between, so connecting, like, okay, what did that person say?
Yeah.
How's it related to that other person? I think that can be quite challenging, especially with there was another comment in the chat about how it links with pronunciation. So being able to understand the pronunciation is very hard.
Students also sometimes get lost.
Mm.
They
Yeah.
kind of get lost somewhere in between the listening, and then that's it. They just can't follow. So I think, yes, connecting ideas together can be challenging for a lot of them.
Mm.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the next slide. All right, so what is the purpose for listening? So we mentioned that, listening is an active task and not something where students are just memorizing words or are understanding every word. But what is the purpose? Here I have a number of activities, and I want you to have a look at these activities and tell me which one you think is the most communicative. So here, A, listen and answer 10 questions. B, listen and tick the words you hear. C, listen and draw the picture your partner describes. And D, listen and complete the gaps. So which of these activities do you think is the most communicative?
Getting a lot of C's, a few D's and B's. I think I saw one A. Yeah, mainly C's and D's, Zaina.
Yeah.
Do you
What do
agree
you
with
think?
everyone? Oh, okay. No, I would probably agree with everyone. I think maybe
Yeah.
because listen and draw the picture allows you to kind of, well, it's interactive, isn't it? Because you could maybe stop the teacher or stop your partner, sorry, and ask them questions to clarify. And I think that's important because listening is usually interactive. It's not just you sitting and listening, is it?
Yes. Yeah. So if you chose C, that is probably the activity that's closest to real communication. And the reason is because learners aren't just listening to answer a question or to complete an exercise. They're listening to achieve a purpose. So when they are able to draw the picture their partner is describing, that means they understood it. They caught the meaning. So this one would be the most communicative. Now, this doesn't mean that the other activities are not good. These are still good activities that you can do with students that would also help develop certain listening skills. So listening and answering questions or completing the gaps are still exercises you can do when you are teaching listening. However, if you want it to be more communicative, you want to choose a task where you're guaranteeing that the students understood the meaning. And when they draw, you know that they understood. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about the stages of listening. So before I show you the 3 stages of listening, if you can share with us in the chat box, what are the 3 stages of listening?
I might have just given away one of them.
It's okay, sneak peek. Okay, so we have pre-listening, while, post, good. Pre, during, and post. Excellent. So if you can show them now, Stephen.
Yeah.
Yes, very good. So pre-listening, basically where students are preparing before they listen. And in this situation, in this stage, they would be possibly predicting. I saw in some of the comments, somebody wrote also pre-teaching vocabulary. So that would also be a good time to pre-teach some vocabulary that you would think might help students understand the listening better. Again, we don't want to teach them every single word, but any word that you feel would help them understand it more would be a good idea to pre-teach. And then we move on to the while listening stage, and this is where they're actually listening to the text. And here they're listening for a purpose. So you want to make sure that you've given them a reason to listen. And this reason should somehow be done in a way where you ensure that they get meaning out of it. And finally, we have after listening or post listening, as some of you mentioned. And here is where students make the listening more meaningful. They're actually using the information in some kind of activity like a discussion, in a role play. And this is where you can see how much students have understood as well from the listening. So it is an important part after listening or post listening. We shouldn't skip it. I think a lot of teachers sometimes tend to skip this part because the listening sometimes takes a lot of time. But this is where you see meaning. This is where you see whether students have actually understood and are using what they understood in the listening meaningfully. So it is an important step, and we want to make sure that we always include it when we are teaching listening. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit now about what we can do in each stage. So for the first stage here, before learners listen, what can we do? So we've already mentioned prediction, and someone has also mentioned pre-teaching vocabulary. What else can we do in the pre-listening stage? Okay, so we have teach new words, talk about the subject, KWL charts, raise interest, attract their attention, introduce the topic, brainstorm. Yeah, very good. Tell a story, provide context, warm up. Excellent. Very good. So can we see what we have on the slide here? Right. So we have predict, use pictures, activate vocabulary, ask a question, set a purpose. Very good. So these are some ideas, and there were also some other ideas here that are not on the slide, but they were equally important and equally interesting as well. So a lot of interesting things to generate interest in the topic before starting. Anytime you do a task where you generate interest for students, you activate their prior knowledge, the task immediately becomes easier. So instead of just jumping into the task, it will become more difficult and more challenging for students to complete it if they haven't actually discussed it or thought about it or looked at a picture or discussed the topic. So it does help. This step is important to help them understand the listening better. If we go on to during listening, we want to make sure we give learners a reason to listen. So instead of telling students, listen and answer questions, we should try these ideas. You can show the ideas, please. Listen and draw. Listen and order pictures. Listen and choose. Listen and follow instructions. So here, these type of tasks allow students to show that they understand. When you ask students to listen and answer questions, sometimes they're multiple choice, sometimes they're true and false. In a lot of situations, students are guessing. Or sometimes they caught a word that helped them find the answer, but you don't really know if they understood. However, when you're asking them to do a task that they can only complete if they actually understood the listening, that shows you whether they've understood it or not. And tasks like drawing after listening, ordering the pictures, putting them in the correct order, choosing something, or following instructions. So while they're listening, they have to follow instructions, maybe go from, a place to another place, or from one building to another, or from one street to another. So these show you that they actually understand. But if it's just, answer these questions, you don't really know if they've understood or not, especially when it's multiple choice or true and false. Okay, and if we go on to the next slide, we'll look at while listening, what we can do here. So after listening, we don't just stop at the answers. So once students have given us the answers, we don't just stop there. So what could we do? What kind of activities can we do for the post-listening part?
So we've got discussions, role
Yeah.
plays, practice, expanding, drilling maybe, evaluating, follow-up discussions, lots of different ones there, Zainab.
Summarizing, that's a good one too. Yeah.
Quite hard though, I think, summarizing sometimes.
Yeah, maybe for stronger students. Okay, very good. So excellent ideas. We have some ideas also on the slide here. Okay, so compare answers, retell the story, role play, solve a problem, draw and explain. So some of these ideas were mentioned in the chat and others as well. So thank you very much for sharing. Is there anything you'd like to add to it, Stephen?
No, but I think I saw some comments that were about, for example, like sometimes learners find it difficult to listen and draw. Maybe they're not so good at drawing, or they find it hard to follow. I think one thing to remember is you can keep the drawings quite simple. And I think one thing that's quite nice to do as an after listening is basically for the learners to repeat the task, but they do it in pairs. So let's say they've been drawing a house, they draw the teacher's house first, and then they work in a pair, and then they draw each other's houses. Because I think that can definitely, because it's the kind of staging, isn't it, that you were talking about, and the kind of modeling of an activity, which then the learners can then copy and do themselves because you've given them an example.
Very good, yeah. All right. So let's now move on to look at some interesting listening activities that you can try with your students. So we have one activity called dual dictation. Can you show the others? Yeah, class memory quiz and listen for lies. So these activities or listening activities are available in the course, the free course, How to Teach Listening. I'm going to explain one of them to you, which is listening for lies, because that one's my favorite. But if you want to know more about these activities, you can find them in the course, How to Teach Listening. Now, for the activity Listening for Lies is really fun. What you do is you put your students into teams, and you have one learner come up and read a story. So they would read the story twice. They would read the story first time correctly without making any changes or not adding any lies. And then the second time they read it, they would make a few changes. So they include some lies. And students have to pick up when the student made the change the second time he or she reads it. And the first team to stand up when they hear the lie gets a point. And you complete this, you continue doing this more than once, maybe 3 or 4 times, and with different stories and different learners. And then the team with the most point wins. So this is a fun activity to do to see if students can, because it does change the meaning when you change something in a story, it changes the meaning sometimes. So if they can pick that up, you can see that they understood. So this is a fun activity. The other two are also very nice fun activities that you can try with your students. Have a look at them in the course, How to Teach Listening, and try them in your classroom. I think students would really enjoy it. We also have some other activities that we can try with primary students. So I think a lot of teachers think it's difficult to teach listening to primary students because it's difficult for them to answer questions or to understand the listening. But there are some really fun things you can do with them. So here are just a few. One of them would be to listen and draw. They just create a picture from what they hear. My favorite is listen and do. Young learners love this. So learners respond physically to instructions. You would, total physical response always works really well with young learners. Listen for omission. So learners listen for specific information. And then finally, imagine, story listening. Learners predict and respond to a story. So which one's your favorite, Stephen? Which one do you think would work best with primary students?
Yeah, I mean, with primaries, I do a lot of like you said, like listen and do. We talked about listen and draw already, and I do like that kind of thing as well, because it gets them to be creative and they can decide what they're drawing, and it's more kind of personalized. Story listing, I definitely like. I've done that quite a lot. You mentioned earlier about like reordering the parts of the story. Sometimes I've done it where you get them to they look at the images first, try to order them, maybe even try to tell the story themselves, and then they listen and see if it's similar to the one that's the actual story. So yeah.
Yeah. And I can see in the chat, a lot of them also chose move and find.
Yeah.
It tends to work really well with students. I think also create students, young learners like to draw as well.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
I think they'd all work quite well. Okay, so thank you all very much for your contributions. Let's just look at some key takeaways for teaching listening. Just to summarize what we mentioned, give learners a purpose for listening and not just listen and answer these questions. Develop listening strategies, not just comprehension. Follow the pre-while and post-listening stages. They're all important. They complete each other. Always try to make sure that your lessons are done in a way where you are able to achieve or complete all three stages. And then encourage learners to respond to what they hear. You want to always make sure that you want to check understanding to see if they actually understood. And finally, knowing the subject means understanding how listening works, so we can help learners use listening to communicate with confidence. And that's it for listening. We are now going to hear from Stephen about how we can make pronunciation more engaging.
Yeah, so obviously pronunciation is deeply related to listening, and we have to listen first to be able to identify the words, and then hopefully that can then help us with our pronunciation. The first thing I've got with you today is actually we're going to look at some problems that learners can have with pronunciation. So here's a quote from a student. Can you tell me what's the problem that the learner is having? I'll give you a minute to think about it. What do you think is the problem? Okay, so I've got linking, maybe accent, elision, connecting, being bilingual. Okay.
That's an interesting one.
Okay. Well, there's one that says it maybe doesn't sound like it's English, which is, I mean, I think that's kind of the key, is that with this, when a learner is listening, maybe they don't catch it because the words are so linked together and it doesn't sound like English to them. So yeah.
But a lot of them are saying accent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that can also definitely be an issue. And I think some people have actually guessed what the problem was. So the person is not saying it's not enough, they're saying it's not enough.
Yeah.
And so obviously the problem there is about the connected speech and being able to kind of decipher it, which is obviously quite an important thing for learners. Here's the second problem. Maybe this one's a slightly trickier. The grammar is fine, obviously. Maybe phonetics in one. Okay. Intonation.
Connected speech.
Maybe intonation. Okay, it could be intonation actually.
Somebody wrote, they try to pronounce as they write.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think this the kind of issue here is not obviously the grammar. The issue is we're probably more likely to say I'll do it rather than I will do it. So
Yeah.
something that can happen with pronunciation is kind of overusing and overstressing words, especially kind of full forms. Okay, and the final issue is this one. Where is my bye? I'm hungry. What's the issue here? Enunciation, maybe. Spelling, okay. Yes, so I think Hamza has said that the answer is actually pie. Yes, obviously you don't want to eat pie, you need to eat
Yes.
pie. So it's the wrong word. So what kind of pronunciation problem might be the problem? Okay, so syllables and the phonetics. Yeah, so the difference between b and p. So that's one, it's a kind of common problem.
Yeah.
Which of these do your learners struggle with the most, do you think, Zaina?
I think because I've taught mainly students who speak Arabic.
Yeah.
The last one. They tend to get pa and ba confused a lot.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Okay, so these are some areas that we need to think about when we're teaching pronunciation. And the features that we need to kind of focus on are, like Zainab just mentioned, individual sounds, so the differences between p and b. Maybe weak forms are important, so you're saying t and was instead of to and was. Word and sentence stress, which we looked at maybe with the I will, but for obviously it's Brazil, not. Is it Brazil or was it Brazil? That's wrong, actually. It should be Brazil.
Yeah,
So,
it's the second syllable.
yeah, the second syllable is the stress. So that's obviously an issue. Rhythm, the way we speak, the kind of dom-de-dom, and then also the intonation. So is it rising? Is it falling? So if you think about your learners, which feature do they need most support with? So obviously Zainab mentioned p and b, but obviously, okay, some people are saying weak forms. Minimal pairs can be an issue, individual sounds, all of it from somebody as well. Okay.
Actually, I think it does depend a little bit on the learner's first language.
Yeah.
As I've
For
had,
example?
because I mentioned with like students who speak Arabic, individual sounds, because there's a lot of sounds in Arabic that don't exist in the English alphabet and then vice versa. But then I've also taught students from Asia who had issues with intonation more than individual sounds. The intonation was very different from English intonation. So and it kind of like transferred when they're speaking. So the intonation is a bit off. So I think it depends a lot on the learner's first language.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely agree with that. And when you're teaching different learners from different areas, obviously you've got to focus on different things that are useful for those learners. So when we're kind of thinking about our learners, some things that we have to consider are, for example, the age group is definitely important. You can't teach maybe complex pronunciation concepts to lower levels or younger kids, but you can do it implicitly and just through kind of practice and games. But do think about the age group you're teaching. Think about their language level as well. Obviously, some things are more important than others. Like intrusive sounds are not going to be super important for low-level learners, but things like word stress are. Also think about the lesson aim. What's the aim of the lesson that you're teaching? So, for example, if you're teaching like present perfect to a group of learners, you've got to think about what's the pronunciation that they need to know about the present perfect. So, for example, they might need to know the weaker form of been, so it's been. And they also need to think about using the contraction I've or he's, she's instead of the full form. And then also you've got to think about, are you going to integrate the pronunciation into a normal teaching lesson, like when you're teaching grammar or vocabulary, or are you going to isolate it and just do a pronunciation focus? I think this links back to what Zainab was saying before about it depends on the context that you're teaching and the learners. Some learners really benefit from isolating a pronunciation point and doing that for a whole lesson, whereas some kind of respond better when it's kind of integrated into other parts of the lesson. So when we're doing pronunciation, it's important to think of kind of three key things. So we had the reception, which was the snot enough thing that we looked at before. So we need to be able to hear it correctly before we can produce it correctly. If we can't hear it, then it's very difficult for us to pronounce. Then we need to imitate to kind of get our mouth around the word to get kind of used to it, and then produce it. So this could be some kind of activity. There's a good comment actually here from someone who says reception is important, otherwise it becomes a broken phone. Which is
Yes,
definitely true.
well said.
Yeah. You hear something that's maybe completely different to what is said. So yeah. So which stage do you need to develop more as a teacher? Which one do you need activity ideas for? So Zainab, how about you? Which one do you feel you need more help with?
I think with reception and imitation, that's quite easy. You know,
Yeah.
you're just saying it and they're repeating it. But I think with production, you want to make sure that they're actually producing it. So yeah, I think maybe I would like to know produce or to pronounce the language more effectively. So maybe production.
Yeah. Okay. I think for me, actually, one thing that sometimes teachers miss, and we were talking about some observations yesterday, weren't we, Zainab? But
Yeah.
sometimes teachers miss the reception stage quite a lot because they just want to get the learners using or repeating the words. And I think sometimes the learners need time to actually kind of process it and kind of understand the words. So sometimes I know that I probably move quicker towards the pronunciation to the actual production rather than spending a bit more time with reception. So yeah, that's fine. Okay, so what we're going to look at is some different activities that we can do for each of these stages. So these are three reception activities. As Zainab pointed out before, all of these activities are part of the How to Teach pronunciation course, so you can definitely find them there. I think we'll focus on one of them today. Listen and clap is kind of self-explanatory. The learners have to clap where the stress is in a sentence. But we'll skip to the kind of minimal pairs one, because this is an activity that I've done with primary learners, and they like it because it's got a kind of silly element to it. Oops. So we've got two columns here. We have banana and we have monkey. In your class, the teacher says a word from the banana column or the monkey column, and the students have to say which column it's from. So the teacher says the word, and the learners say banana or monkey. Okay, so let's do it. You're a learner, Zainab, and I'm a teacher. So the first one is cloud.
Monkey.
Excellent. Pear.
Banana.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. And pray.
Banana.
Okay. And cheers.
Monkey.
Monkey, exactly. So you could do this with as a whole class, but then you could also do it in pairs and in groups, and they could even write their own, learners could write their own kind of little minimal pairs. And it can also be focused on things that your learners find difficult. So for example, Zainab before mentioned that it was like but and per is one that's very common problem. So you could make them all but and per words. So instead of just bear and pear, it could be like, let me think of one off the top of my head. That's going to be hard. I mean, you could do bray and pray, slightly obscure word, but it would, but that would definitely work. Okay, so these are kind of reception activities, but it can also be used as a production activity if you get the learners to work in pairs too. Okay, but one step that you could do before you get the learners to work in pairs is to do kind of imitation activities to get them to actually say the words before they start saying them and doing the activities themselves. So one thing that's very common in class is that we would say, for example, repeat after me, and you say a word. So repeat after me, football. Okay. Can anyone notice a kind of problem with this as an imitation task? So what's the problem?
Everyone might say it in the same time. There's no context, too many voices. It's boring.
Yes.
Traditional, too simple.
Yeah, exactly.
Passive.
Yeah, these are
I
good
agree.
comments. Yeah, lots of good comments. I think as well, one thing to remember with repetition is we don't need to get the learners to repeat every single word. We should only really focus on the ones that they find difficult.
Yeah.
Because if they, I mean, a word like football, I mean, most people are able to say this word.
Exactly.
So there's no point in spending a lot of time doing that. So I'm going to show now some kind of different ways that you could do these kind of imitation tasks. The first one is back chaining. Do you know what happens with this one, Zainab?
You would say part of the word, but you would start backwards.
Exactly. So we'll just use the boring word. We'll use football. So back chaining, for example, I would say, okay, repeat after me, Zainab. Ball.
Ball.
Football.
Football.
Okay, and then I play football.
I play football.
Okay, so yeah, you start at the end and go to the beginning. This is so that the learners kind of focus more on the sounds and less on the kind of meaning. It's also very important maybe not to have the word on the on your whiteboard or on a slide because they can start to read and that can definitely impact the pronunciation.
Yes.
Another one that you can do is an emotion drill. So we have 3 emotions here. And we've got happy, we've got angry, and we've got sad. So this time, I will say the word and I will point to an emotion. Okay. And Zainab, you say the word using that emotion. Okay.
Okay.
So football.
Football.
Perfect. Excellent. Football.
Football.
Okay. And football.
Football.
Okay, great. So this is obviously to get our learners used to using words in different ways. We're not just saying it flat all the time. When we're talking with people, we do it with different emotions. So yeah.
I can see a lot of them like this activity.
Yeah, it's fun, kind of fun as well. Yeah.
It's fun, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I've got another one called countdown drill. I'm not sure we've got time to do this one. I think we'll leave this one because it's also if you join the How to Teach Pronunciation course, you can join our Facebook group. And in that Facebook group, there is already a video where you can see how to do the countdown drill. So maybe you can go and search for it there. Okay, and the last one is a silent drill, which I'll just quickly explain. So instead of saying the word, you just mouth the word. So, and then the students have to tell you which word it is. This is good because the learners get to see the shape of your mouth, get used to where they're supposed to put their mouth. It's also good in very big classes because when you drill in big classes, there can be a lot of shouting. So they really have to be quiet and kind of listen to you and see your voice. Okay, and the last part, I think we've already answered this question. We've had lots of people kind of, oh, there's another one there about shadowing. Yeah, that's a good technique.
That is, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have already commented on this one. Okay, the last thing is just some production activities. And again, these are from the course, How to Teach Pronunciation. So you can definitely do that on the courses on the site. And you'll find lots of other kind of pronunciation ideas in the Facebook group that's attached to that. So there's word tennis, the right question, and bingo. One that I personally do quite a lot is kind of word tennis. So we'll just do this quickly, Zainab. So there are different ways that you can do it. One way is, for example, you could focus on word stress. So I would say a word with a certain stress, and Zainab would have to say another one with the same stress. So for example, information.
Communication.
Okay, conversation.
Station.
Oh, because you need the information, so the 4 syllables.
Okay,
Okay.
station is 2 syllables.
Yeah, exactly. So in that game, Zainab was the loser, so I get a point, and then we do another one. So we can do it like a kind of game like that. You can also do it with minimal pairs. So I would say a word, and then Zainab would need to say another word that is a minimal pair of that word. So for example, let's go for boat.
Sorry, were you asking me?
Yeah, so a minimal pair. Boat.
Okay, boat, pote.
Okay. What did you say? Sorry.
Pote.
Okay. I actually can't think of one, so that's a point to you, Zainab.
Okay.
But that's one way. Yeah, well, they've got some good answers in there, like coats. Yeah, okay, excellent. So that's one activity you can use for kind of production and kind of practicing. The other two activities, the right question and bingo, you will find in the course, and there is the link here, and I'm sure it will be shared with you in the chat as well. Okay, so thinking about pronunciation, just as a kind of final thing, remember to kind of integrate it into your lessons. So don't always think of it as something that's kind of separate. Remember to use it when you're teaching grammar or vocabulary. Remember to use those kind of 3 stages of a kind of listening, reception, imitation, and production. Think about your learners and the context. And I think one thing to think about with the kind of production activities is making sure they have a kind of pleasurable tension so that you can you find it fun basically when you're doing it, okay? But it's also challenging. So just to sum up, knowing the subject means developing our awareness of pronunciation so we can help them speak with confidence, okay? Great. So finally, the last point, our last aim. So how can we continue to develop our subject knowledge, Zainab?
Yes, we're going to look at the free courses on the Teaching English website. So for our theme, Knowing the Subject, from July to September, we have 3 courses under the theme, Knowing the Subject, which are Understanding Language Systems, Teaching English in Primary, and Communicative Tasks. Now, Communicative Tasks is completely new. So for those of you who have been with us for a long time and have done most of our courses, this is good news for you. These courses are open now for enrollment, and they're open until the end of September. We also have a number of other courses also, including how to teach listening and how to teach pronunciation. And that is where you will find the ideas we mentioned in today's webinar. And all of these courses are free. So please go have a look at the courses and enroll in whichever course you are interested in. There's also the pathways. The link to the pathways will be posted in the chat box. And in the pathways, you will find lots of different resources under the theme, Knowing the Subject, such as videos, articles, publications, podcasts, webinars, and most importantly, lesson plans. You'll find lots of lesson plans, ready to use lesson plans that you can use in your classroom. And then there's also a workbook for Knowing the Subject, which you can download as well. So this is a great place to get some resources.
Okay, so thinking about what we've just done. So we've looked at the teaching of listening, teaching of pronunciation, and how we can continue to develop in our subject knowledge. Just in the chat, everyone, tell us what's one strategy that you saw today that you would like to try in your classroom. Oh, countdown. Emotion drill, word tennis, chain, listen for lies. I did like that actually, listen for lies. I haven't tried it myself, so I might try that.
But a lot of them like the emotional drill.
Yeah. So that's good. Okay. Okay. So I think we've reached the end. So time for questions.
Hi, Stephen. Hi, Zainab. Thanks very much. Lots of great activities. I loved it. But yeah, time for questions. If anyone has a question for our presenters here, anything can be about one of the activities. Maybe you want to know a bit more. It could just be about knowing the subject in general. We'd love to know. I saw a question that came in from somebody in Facebook. So someone watching from Facebook asks, for young learners about pronunciation, do you use phonetic script with them? Or is it more kind of just repetition? Yeah, what do you guys do?
With primary learners, I've never really used phonetic script. I don't
Me
think
neither.
I don't think I would. I mean, I would use it with secondaries definitely because they.
Yeah.
But again, I think it depends on the context you're teaching in. Some countries where I've worked, and the learners know the phonetic script, so it actually really helps them. But if they don't know it, I don't think it's that useful for primary learners. I think just getting them kind of involved in just speaking, so kind of saying the words, playing different games. I noticed one comment in the chat about using flashcards, and that's a great way to practice pronunciation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same, Zainab? What do you do?
Yes, I definitely agree with Stephen. I mean, young learners are learning the alphabet, and if you're teaching them the phonetic symbols, it's like teaching them two languages at the same time. So no, I don't think it's a good idea. There are many other ways to get them to learn how to pronounce properly. And students at that age, they pick up the language so quickly. You don't really need to use the phonemics chart at all.
Okay, thanks. A lot of the questions are about pronunciation. This is obviously a topic that teachers want to talk about. Another one is about a teacher who's got a big class. I can't find their name at the moment, but they say the activities when you've got to look at the teacher's mouth. How do you do it when there's a big class and maybe they're quite far away at the back? Any tips?
I would put them in groups and maybe have one of the stronger students mouth out the word. You can do it, you can say the word to them first and make sure everybody hears it. And then you can have them in groups, and then they can do it while sitting on tables so they can see each other. I mean, with larger classes, it always works. Most activities work if you just put them in groups, because it's difficult to have the teacher do everything with them.
Yeah, I think a kind of queuing system can also work. So if you've got a traditional classroom with the lines, so you basically just do it with the students in the front row, and they can see you, and then you say the word, and they have to say it, and if they all say it, fine. And then those students walk to the back of the line, and the next students come forward one, and then you do another word with the next one. So you do it in kind of lines like that. And that can make it, you can also make that into a kind of activity, like a game, like the first person to shout out the right word gets a point, that kind of thing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I really like that. I really like that. Lots of movement. That's cool. And I guess moving around the classroom as well as a teacher, I kind of like moving. I want to go to the back sometimes and see those students. You could do that. Let's go to another question about accent. And Ramonito says, which accent do you teach? I think I probably know what you're both going to say, right?
Do you want to
Zainab,
answer that, Stephen?
Yeah, well, I just the accent that you speak in. I mean,
Exactly.
I don't think I think it's important anyway for learners to get exposed to any kind of accent. So
Yeah.
the accent of you as a teacher is super useful, because maybe most of the time the learners, as they go through their life and maybe they use English when they're older, they might not speak with people from Scotland or people from England or people from America. Like they might not, but maybe they're going to speak with other people who are from their context in English, and that can happen. I think it's probably just as useful.
Yeah.
I always say, as long as the teacher's pronunciation is clear, it doesn't matter what the accent is, as long as they're pronouncing it correctly. That's it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, look at the time, Stephen, Zainab, we've enjoyed this so much. And everyone who's watching, if you want to see more of Stephen and Zainab, then join the Facebook group from the British Council Teaching English. It's called Courses for Teachers. And there you'll see both of these wonderful presenters here doing more live sessions and posting, and you can interact even more. But we have to say goodbye for now. But we will be back in 15 minutes. We'll be back with a session called Activating Grammar for Communication with another wonderful presenter, Jane. So don't go too far, but we will see you soon. Thanks, everyone, to the presenters, and thanks to Marcus for streaming, Joe, and Wiam for working in moderation. We'll be back again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining.